My husband refused to let me work, saying, "A woman should stay home." He left me with nothing after the divorce, thinking I'd be helpless. 10 years later, I bought the company that fired him. It was a Wednesday morning when everything changed. I stared at the news report on my phone, heart pounding as the words, "Company X declares bankruptcy," flashed across the screen. The name of my ex-husband, James Delaney, was splashed across the headline in bold letters. I felt a sickening jolt in my stomach. He had once sat at the helm of this company, running it with an iron fist, convinced that his success was built solely on his strength and drive. But here it was, the end of his empire, and I couldn't help but smile. He had no idea that the woman he had dismissed as just a housewife had been watching, waiting for this moment. After everything he had put me through, it was hard not to feel a deep satisfaction. But the truth was, this wasn't just about his downfall. It was about me, the woman he thought would never rise again. As I watched the report, my thoughts raced back to the day he left me, a broken woman with nothing but the clothes on my back and a shattered sense of self-worth. I had been the dutiful wife, putting aside my dreams to support his career, believing in the promise of our life together. But after the divorce, everything changed. He took everything, our house, our savings, and worst of all, my dignity. I was left with nothing, cast aside like I had never mattered. He thought I would crumble, that I would wither without him. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't the same woman anymore. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and now I was stronger than ever. His downfall was only the beginning of my plan for revenge. Thank you all for being part of this journey. If you're enjoying these empowering stories, don't forget to subscribe. It's free and helps grow our community. Let's get started. I had been patient, biding my time for 10 years. 10 years of building my own life, learning the ropes of business, and getting back on my feet. James had never thought I was capable of anything more than running a household. He thought he had broken me, but what he had done was light a fire in me. A fire that I nurtured in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, as I watched the news about his bankruptcy unfold, I knew that moment had arrived. He had no idea what was coming next. I had worked hard to get to this point. While James was busy building his empire, I had been quietly working behind the scenes, learning everything I could about the world he had once dominated. I had no desire to rebuild what he had destroyed, but I had one goal in mind: to take away the very thing he had used to tear me down. The company he had once owned, the one he had fired me from all those years ago, was now in shambles. And I was going to buy it. I smiled as I typed the first inquiry into my phone, an email that would set everything into motion. The company was up for grabs, and I was going to be the one to take it. The twist. James had no idea what I had become. He thought I was some helpless woman who couldn't survive without him. He was wrong. The woman I was now was not the one he had left behind. I was ready for him to learn just how wrong he had been. The question was, how would he react when he found out that I, his ex-wife, was the one who would take everything from him? I had never imagined this day would come. Back then, I never thought I would rise again. I had spent years in the shadows, nursing my wounds, learning how to heal. But now, looking at the wreckage of James's life, I felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine. It was about taking control of my own destiny. And I was going to do it in a way that would make him realize just how foolish he had been to underestimate me. But it wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about showing myself that I was capable of so much more than I had ever believed. James had stripped me of everything, but in doing so he had given me the motivation to rebuild. He had forced me to become something I never thought I could be, a woman who could take on the world. And now, with everything in my grasp, I would make sure he understood just how far I had come. I wasn't sure what I expected from him when we eventually crossed paths again. Would he beg for forgiveness? Would he try to manipulate me like he had done in the past? Or would he simply be too proud to admit that I had outsmarted him? Whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same person who had once cowered before him. I was stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. And he was about to learn that. The next day I received a call that made my heart race. It was a broker with inside knowledge of the company's downfall. "It's yours if you want it," he said. The words hit me like a thunderclap. I had known this moment would come, but hearing that the company was within my reach, was something else entirely. My pulse quickened as I realized the full weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was the final step in a 10-year-long journey. It was the moment I would finally take back everything James had stolen from me. I stood up from my desk, my hands shaking with anticipation. The decision was mine to make. The company could be mine. I could destroy what he had built, take control of everything he had once held so dear. It wasn't just about getting back at him. It was about proving that I had the strength to move forward, even when the odds were stacked against me. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone, ready to make the call that would change everything. I was ready for the next step in my journey, the step that would bring me face to face with James again. But this time it would be on my terms. And I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he realized who had orchestrated his downfall. I picked up the phone, my hand shaking slightly as I dialed the number that would change everything. As the phone rang, memories flooded back, uninvited and relentless. It had been 10 years since I had seen him, James, my ex-husband. 10 long years since the day he looked at me, dismissed me and left me with nothing. I could almost hear his voice in my head, his dismissive tone as he told me, "A woman should stay home." Those words had cut deeper than any knife. He had built his life on the idea that my worth was tied to how well I could run a household. He couldn't have been more wrong. I still remember the early days of our marriage before the world started to crumble around us. When we first met, James was charming, driven, and ambitious. I was captivated by his confidence, the way he could command a room with his presence. We were inseparable, a perfect pair, or so I thought. He spoke about our future in grand terms, how we would build an empire together. I was more than willing to support him, putting my own dreams on hold to help him climb the corporate ladder. I was happy to be his partner, to share in his successes, to be the wife who stood by him, believing in his vision. But somewhere along the way, that vision of our future began to shift, and so did James. It wasn't sudden, but the signs were there. Slowly, he started to distance himself from me, both emotionally and mentally. He became obsessed with his career, his status, and the image of the perfect life. My role as his wife became less about partnership and more about submission. I wasn't just supporting him anymore. I was being erased. He didn't need me to have a career, he told me. He didn't need me to dream. I was expected to stay home, take care of the house, and support his ambitions, no questions asked. His words felt like a weight I could never lift. I did it though. I stayed home. I cared for the house, I made his meals, I cleaned the house, and I stood by him as he grew more successful. But the more I did for him, the less he seemed to care. He started to undermine me in small, subtle ways. He mocked my ideas, dismissed my opinions, and told me I was lucky to have him. As the years passed, I started to lose myself, to forget the woman I had once been. His words became a mantra I repeated in my head. A woman should stay home. It wasn't until after our divorce that I realized how deeply I had internalized those words. They had defined me, had shaped my entire existence for so long. When the divorce came, it was nothing short of a shock. James blindsided me, telling me that he no longer wanted to be with me. He had found someone else, someone who could give him the life he thought he deserved. And just like that, I was out of the house we had built together, out of the life I had worked so hard to create. He took everything. The house, the savings, the friends, and even my confidence. I had nothing left but the remnants of a life that was no longer mine. And for a while I didn't know who I was anymore. But there was something I didn't expect. Something that began to stir deep inside me as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. It was a feeling I hadn't had in years. Hope. It was small at first, just a flicker of something buried beneath all the pain and disappointment. But it grew. I began to realize that I wasn't just a woman left behind. I was capable of so much more. I didn't need James to define who I was. And I sure as hell didn't need to stay home and watch my life pass by. Over the next few years, I rebuilt myself. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick. But I learned. I went back to school, started networking, and found a job in an industry I had once thought was out of my reach. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I dove into the world of business, immersing myself in the strategies that had once seemed so foreign to me. I worked late nights, took risks, and learned from every failure. The more I did, the more I realized that I had more power within me than I had ever known. I could stand on my own 2 feet and I could build something for myself. James had thought that I would crumble, that I would fall apart without him. But instead I had rebuilt myself stronger than ever. Every step I took, every decision I made was a step toward reclaiming my power. It wasn't just about getting back at him. It was about proving to myself that I was more than just the woman he had tried to make me. I was a force to be reckoned with. As I sat there, phone in hand, thinking back on those years of suffering, I realized how far I had come. I wasn't just going to get back what I had lost. I was going to take what was mine. I was going to make James see exactly what he had thrown away. And in doing so, I would finally be able to prove to myself that I was worth so much more than he had ever given me credit for. I pressed send on the email, and as I waited for the response, I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. The company that James had once run, the one he had built from the ground up, was now within my reach. He had been careless, reckless with his decisions, and now it was crumbling. I knew this was my chance. This was my moment to take control of the narrative. But what I didn't expect was the feeling of calm that washed over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't consumed by the desire for revenge. I simply wanted what was mine. And this was the first step. James had no idea what was coming. He thought I was just some woman who had been left behind. He thought I couldn't survive without him. But I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And when he found out who had taken everything from him, when he learned that it was me, the woman he had cast aside, the one he had once dismissed as unimportant, he would understand just how wrong he had been. The tables had turned, and I was ready to show him exactly who he had underestimated all those years ago. As I sat staring at the email confirmation that the company was now officially in my sights, my mind started to race. The truth was, the excitement of the possibility of owning this company didn't feel like an overwhelming rush as I had expected. It felt more like a weight, an immense responsibility that I hadn't anticipated. I had spent so many years thinking about getting back at James for how he had discarded me, for the way he had treated me like I was nothing more than a tool for his success. But now that the opportunity to claim what was mine had finally come, a strange sense of dread settled over me. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, and I was faced with a stark realization. Revenge was never as simple as it seemed. The last time I had seen James, I had been a broken woman. A woman who had been betrayed by the one person she trusted above all others. I had tried to convince myself that I was better off without him, that I didn't need him to validate my worth. But now, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I realized just how much that betrayal had changed me. I could still feel the weight of his words, the sting of his rejection. A woman should stay home. The words echoed in my mind, louder now than they ever had been before. It wasn't just about the betrayal itself. It was about the way he had tried to strip away my identity, to make me feel like I didn't matter. I had tried to move past it, but it wasn't that simple. When you've given everything to someone and they turn their back on you, it's impossible to just walk away without feeling the scars. I had spent years hiding those scars behind a facade of strength, telling myself I didn't need him or anyone else. I had built a new life, but the emotional toll of that betrayal lingered in the quiet moments of my life. It was only when I took a step back and looked at where I was now that I realized how deep the wounds ran. I wasn't just trying to prove him wrong, I was trying to heal the parts of me he had broken. And then there it was, the chance to take everything back. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about reclaiming my self-respect, taking back control over the life he had tried to take from me. I had told myself that I wouldn't get emotionally involved with the process, that this would be business pure and simple. But the reality was much messier. Every step I took toward owning the company brought me closer to facing James again, and I wasn't sure I was prepared for that. As I prepared to make the final move to purchase the company and take it from under his feet, I couldn't help but wonder, what would it be like when we came face to face again? Would he even recognize me? The woman he had left behind was not the same woman I was now. I had built a life for myself, piece by piece, and now, when I walked into that boardroom as the owner, I would make sure he saw the woman who had risen from the ashes of his betrayal. He wouldn't see a broken housewife anymore. He would see a force of nature. But would that be enough? Just as I was mulling over these thoughts, my phone buzzed. A message from the broker. I clicked it open, my heart skipping a beat. It was a simple message. It's done. You're the new owner. For a moment, I was stunned into silence. This was it. I had done it. The company was mine, and James had no idea. It was the moment I had been waiting for, but there was no joy in it. Only a strange sense of emptiness, as if I had been so focused on the goal that I had lost sight of what this all meant. The broker's message also included the next steps, a meeting set up for the following week. It would be the moment I would sign the papers, officially taking ownership. And when that day came, James would have to face the consequences of everything he had done. But what would that look like? What was I really after? Was it just about watching him squirm, or was there something deeper? Something more meaningful to this whole pursuit? As the days passed, I found myself consumed by the upcoming meeting. I couldn't help but replay the past over and over in my mind. The memories of our life together. The way he used to look at me when he thought I was weak. The way he used to say, "You'll never make it on your own." It felt like a puzzle I was still trying to put together, a puzzle whose pieces were scattered across the years. But I had to let go of the past. I had to stop focusing on the pain he had caused me and start focusing on the woman I had become. But still, I couldn't help but wonder how I would feel when I saw him again. Would I feel vindicated? Would I feel triumphant? Or would I feel a sense of loss? A reminder that we had once shared something that could never be fully repaired? The closer I got to the day of the meeting, the more questions I had. And then the unexpected happened. James reached out to me. It was a brief message, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. He wanted to meet. He said he had something important to discuss. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, unsure of how to respond. Was this some kind of trick? Was he trying to win me back, to manipulate me the way he used to? Or was he finally realizing the magnitude of his actions? The timing felt too coincidental to ignore. And yet, something inside me told me this wasn't the time to let my guard down. I debated whether or not to meet with him. On one hand, this was my moment to confront him, to tell him everything I had been holding inside for all these years. On the other hand, I didn't want to risk losing control. I had come so far, and I couldn't afford to let him derail everything I had worked for. Still, the temptation was strong. The thought of finally confronting him, of making him understand the pain he had caused me, was hard to resist. But I couldn't let my emotions dictate my decisions. Not now. I sent a reply, keeping it short and neutral. "I'm not interested in discussing the past, James. I'm focused on the future." But inside, I wasn't sure if I was making the right choice. Part of me wanted to see him, to finally have that conversation. But another part of me knew that it would only cloud my judgment, dragging me back into a past I was trying to escape. The decision was made. I wasn't going to let him distract me. The company was mine now, and I was going to take it, and my life, into my own hands. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with a nervous anticipation I couldn't quite shake. The company was mine, but I knew the real work was just beginning. It wasn't just about signing papers. It was about taking control of a legacy that James had built, a legacy he thought would stay out of my reach forever. He had always thought I was weak, that I was nothing more than a housewife who had no place in his world of power and business. But now I was the one in charge. And he had no idea what was coming. The reality of owning the company hit me like a wave as I sat in my office, looking out at the sprawling city skyline. It was overwhelming. This wasn't just any company. It was the one James had once led, the one he had built with his own hands. And now it was mine. I had to admit, the feeling of ownership was intoxicating. But with that power came responsibility. I wasn't just taking over a business. I was stepping into a role that came with a history, one that I would need to understand, navigate, and ultimately reshape. I began by analyzing everything. The financials, the employees, the company's culture. I had to learn everything about this place. Its strengths, its weaknesses, and most importantly, its future. James had left a trail behind him, and I was determined to understand it all. As I pored over documents, I came across reports detailing the company's decline, the risky decisions James had made in the final years of his leadership. The signs were clear. He had been too focused on his own ego to see the cracks forming beneath him. And now I was the one left to clean up the mess. But cleaning up wasn't enough. I didn't want to just take over. I wanted to dominate. I wanted to show James that his fall from grace was not just inevitable. It was deserved. I knew I couldn't just walk into the company and start making changes without careful planning. This was bigger than me, and I had to approach it strategically. The first step was understanding the board. The people who had once worked under James were now mine to command, but I couldn't afford to alienate them. Some of them had supported James blindly, while others had been quietly dissatisfied with his leadership. I would need to be both firm and persuasive, showing them that my vision for the company was one that would take it to new heights. But I wasn't just doing this for the company, I was doing it for myself. I wanted James to understand that I wasn't some woman who had been left behind. I was the one who had outlasted him, who had risen from the ashes of his betrayal. As the days passed, I started making changes. Small ones at first. Restructuring the team, getting rid of the dead weight, implementing a more efficient workflow. But soon I knew I would have to make a bigger move. The employees were starting to notice and I could feel the tension building. They were waiting for something, wondering how I would handle the pressure. But I was ready. This was my moment and I wasn't going to let it slip away. The plan was coming together. I would make my move in the next board meeting. I had already scheduled it, giving myself enough time to prepare. I knew the moment I stepped into that room, everything would change. It wasn't just about asserting control over the company. It was about asserting control over my life, my future. This was the moment I had been working toward for years. But just as I was beginning to feel the excitement of the coming changes, a twist I hadn't anticipated surfaced. James contacted me again. This time it wasn't just a simple message. He wanted a meeting face to face. I couldn't help but feel a knot form in my stomach. I had been so focused on the company, on taking what was mine, that I hadn't really considered the possibility of seeing him again. Part of me had been hoping that I would never have to face him. But now the reality was different. He had reached out and now I had to make a choice. I thought about it long and hard. Should I meet with him? Part of me wanted to show up and finally say everything I had been holding inside. I wanted him to understand that I had made it without him, that I had built something of my own. But another part of me knew that seeing him again could throw off my carefully laid plans. I had worked too hard to let emotions cloud my judgment now. The more I thought about it, the clearer my decision became. I would meet with him, but on my terms. This wasn't going to be a conversation about the past. This was going to be a conversation about the future. He had no place in my world anymore, but I would give him the satisfaction of seeing me in control, of showing him that everything he had built was now mine. The thought of him sitting across from me, powerless, was enough to steel my resolve. The day of the meeting arrived and I prepared myself as I had for any high-stakes business deal. I wore my best suit, a sharp, confident look that conveyed both authority and composure. When I arrived at the meeting room, James was already there. He hadn't changed much, still the same arrogant man I remembered, his posture stiff and confident. But when he saw me, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it regret? Fear? I couldn't tell, but I knew one thing. This meeting was not going to go the way he expected. "Good to see you," James said, his voice clipped. I sat down across from him, meeting his gaze head-on. "It's been a long time," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the emotions that churned inside me. He tried to make small talk, but I wasn't interested in pleasantries. I wasn't here to reminisce about the past. I was here to let him know exactly what had been happening behind the scenes. "I'm sure you've heard by now," I said, leaning forward slightly, "but I'm the new owner of the company." James's face shifted, his composure faltering for the first time. I could see the shock in his eyes, the realization that his empire was no longer his. "You're what?" he stammered. I smiled, the satisfaction of finally watching him squirm coursing through me. "You heard me," I said, watching as the weight of my words settled over him. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. This was the moment I had dreamed of for so long. And I was finally getting to experience it. He looked at me, the woman he had discarded, the woman he thought he could control, and for the first time he saw me for what I had become. "You never thought I could do it, did you?" I asked softly, my voice laced with the calm confidence I had built over the years. "You thought I was nothing. A housewife. But I'm more than that, James. I always was." I leaned back in my chair, watching as his face slowly drained of color. For the first time he was the one who looked powerless. He had been the one to underestimate me, to dismiss me as insignificant. But now the tables had turned. And as I sat there, I knew that this was just the beginning. The silence that hung between us was thick with tension. James sat across from me, his shock apparent, his usual cocky demeanor shattered by the reality of the situation. It had taken me years to get here, years of rebuilding myself, learning from my mistakes and becoming stronger. And now, in this moment, I was finally watching him realize just how much I had accomplished and just how wrong he had been about me. He opened his mouth, probably trying to form some response, but nothing came out at first. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an explanation, something to help him make sense of this bizarre turn of events. But there was no explanation. The truth was simple: I had done it. I had taken everything he once believed was his. And I had done it without his help, without his approval, and without his guidance. And now he had no idea how to process it. James, I said calmly, breaking the silence, you thought I would just disappear, didn't you? That I would crumble when you left me. But look at me now. I'm not the same person you left behind. He looked at me with something between disbelief and admiration. I could see it in his eyes. He had underestimated me. He had thought that I was nothing without him, that I needed him to survive. But now he had no choice but to acknowledge the strength I had built from the ground up. This wasn't just a business takeover. It was a personal victory. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my future. I never thought you could do this, he finally spoke, his voice low, almost ashamed. It was the first time in all these years that I had heard him speak like that. There was no arrogance, no superiority. There was only the reality of the situation. He was the one who had been outplayed. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice steady but my words sharp. You never thought I could do it because you never saw me for who I really am. You thought I was just a housewife, someone who couldn't make it on her own. But I'm more than that, James. I always have been. His face flushed as he tried to gather his thoughts. He was caught off guard, trying to piece together what was happening. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. Instead, he just stared at me as if searching for something to hold on to. But there was nothing left for him to grab. The tables had turned and I was in control now. The power that surged through me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt before. All those years of feeling invisible, of being dismissed, of being underestimated, every single bit of it had led to this moment. I had worked so hard to get here and now I was finally reaping the rewards. This wasn't just about business. This was about me proving to myself that I could overcome anything. That I could rise from the ashes of my past and become the woman I had always been meant to be. But just as I was savoring the sweetness of this moment, a new twist hit me. As the silence dragged on, I saw the door to the boardroom open, and a man in a suit stepped inside. He was unfamiliar to me and his sudden appearance caused a shift in the atmosphere. James seemed to recognize him immediately, his face going pale. The man approached us slowly, his eyes darting between James and me. Is everything all right here? The man asked, his tone professional but tinged with concern. James looked at him, then at me, then back at the man. There was a moment of hesitation before he spoke. Yes, everything's fine, he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I just wasn't expecting this. The man's gaze shifted to me and I could sense that something wasn't right. He wasn't just some employee, he was someone important. Someone with enough authority to make me uneasy. But why was he here? What did this sudden appearance mean for me? Before I could ask, the man turned to James. We need to talk, he said, his voice low. James nodded quickly, his hands trembling as he stood up. He didn't look at me as he left the room with the man, but I could see the panic in his eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen him so vulnerable, so unsure of himself. For a moment I just sat there staring at the empty door. What was going on? I had thought I was the one in control, but now I wasn't so sure. I had spent so long planning my revenge, making sure that James would feel the weight of his decisions. And now, it seemed like the situation had taken a turn I hadn't expected. What had just happened? My mind raced as I tried to piece together the new puzzle that had just been placed in front of me. Was there more to this company than I had realized? Had James been hiding something from me? I had thought that by taking over I would have all the answers, but now I was filled with questions. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for them to return. My heart pounded in my chest and I could feel the tension building once again. What had just been a moment of triumph was now shrouded in uncertainty. I wasn't sure what was happening, but one thing was clear. Things were not as simple as I had thought. When James and the man returned, there was an unsettling calm in the room. James avoided looking at me, his usual confidence gone. The man stood beside him, his expression unreadable. The man spoke first, addressing me directly. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, he said, his voice neutral but firm. James may have led you to believe that you could take over the company, but there are legal matters that need to be addressed. There are clauses in the agreement that you may not be aware of. I felt a chill run down my spine. Legal matters? Clauses? What was he talking about? James finally looked at me, his expression tense. There's a reason I left it all behind, you know, he said quietly. There are things you don't know. Things that weren't part of the deal. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What was he saying? Had everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, been a lie? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. The excitement I had felt moments before was quickly replaced by confusion and fear. The situation had changed, and now I didn't know who to trust. It was as if the ground I had been standing on had just disappeared beneath me. The man's gaze softened, but it was clear he wasn't going to make this easy for me. You have a lot to learn, but don't worry. You'll figure it out. James stood there silently, his face drawn and pale, and for the first time, I realized he might not be the only one I had to worry about. There were others involved in this web, and I was no longer sure who was pulling the strings. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with an uncertainty I couldn't shake. My hands, once steady as I faced James across the table, now trembled slightly as I processed the new information. The legal complexities the man had mentioned hung in the air like a storm cloud, and the victory I had so eagerly anticipated now seemed distant, clouded by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. I sat still, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. James, still standing with that same quiet, uneasy expression, finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said, his words devoid of the usual arrogance. "But the truth is, there's more to the story. The company isn't as clean-cut as it seems." His words stung, not just because they were a revelation I hadn't expected, but because they struck at the very core of everything I thought I knew about the situation. I had thought that I had won. I had thought that I had reclaimed what was mine, that my journey of rebuilding and regaining control had come to a glorious end. But now I was left with more questions than answers. The man standing next to him seemed to sense my confusion. He addressed me directly, his tone measured and calm. "What James is trying to say," he began, "is that while the company has legally transferred to you, there are underlying financial issues and agreements that were made in the past. These agreements were kept under wraps, and now you're bound by them whether you realize it or not." The words hit me like a cold wave. "What do you mean, bound by them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though the knots in my stomach were tightening with every passing second. My plan, my carefully constructed vision of taking control, was slipping through my fingers. James shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding mine. "There were partnerships," he said, "with investors, shareholders, and certain promises made that you weren't aware of. If you want to fully control the company, you need to address these issues first." I felt my heart drop as I processed the implications. The legal victory I had thought was mine, a victory over James, over my past, was now entangled in something far more complex, far messier than I had imagined. The company was still in my hands, yes, but I was now entangled in a web of contracts and debts I hadn't known about. I had taken the first step in my journey of revenge, but the final piece of that puzzle, my redemption, my true victory, was still out of reach. For the first time I felt a pang of fear, the realization that my hard-earned success might not be as solid as I had believed. But there was no time for doubt. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to back down now. This was still my chance to take full control, to rewrite my story, but it wasn't going to be easy. I had to navigate this mess, untangle the legal web, and push through the challenges that lay ahead. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere until I know what I'm dealing with." The man nodded, pulling out a folder from under his arm. "This will explain everything," he said as he handed it to me. The folder was thick, filled with pages upon pages of legal documents and financial reports. I flipped through them quickly, scanning the key points, but it was overwhelming. There were names I didn't recognize, terms I didn't fully understand, and clauses that seemed to tie me to decisions made long before I had even taken control. James watched me quietly, his expression unreadable. I could see the faintest glimmer of guilt in his eyes, but whether it was for what he had done to me personally or for the mess he had left behind, I couldn't tell. In that moment, I realized that this whole journey, my attempt at revenge, had never been as simple as I had imagined. It wasn't about just getting back at James. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. And in the process, I had to be prepared to face the complexities that came with it. As I read through the documents, the enormity of the task ahead became clearer. There were debts to be repaid, agreements to be renegotiated, and most daunting of all, the threat of investors who had been quietly pulling strings in the background. If I wasn't careful, I could lose everything just as quickly as I had gained it. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I had spent too many years being pushed aside, being told I wasn't enough, to let it all slip through my fingers now. I need time to process this, I said finally, setting the folder down on the table. My voice was calm, but inside my mind was racing. I had come too far to be deterred by a few obstacles. This was my chance, my moment. I wasn't going to let it slip away. James nodded, his face still pale. Take all the time you need, he said, his voice quieter now. But you need to understand that there are more people involved than you realize. If you want to control the company, you're going to have to play their game. And they don't play fair. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in what felt like years. This wasn't the man I had once loved. This wasn't the man who had been so confident, so sure of himself. Now he seemed small, broken even. For a fleeting moment I almost felt sorry for him. But I quickly shoved that feeling aside. He had made his choices and I had made mine. We were no longer in the same world. I'll play their game, I said, standing up and straightening my shoulders. But on my terms. No more compromises. No more letting people push me around. James stared at me, a mixture of fear and disbelief in his eyes. He knew just as I did that the game had changed. And there was no going back now. As I walked out of the room, the weight of the task ahead settled on my shoulders. The road to true victory was still unclear and the obstacles were many. But I was no longer that broken woman who had been left behind. I was stronger now. And this was only the beginning. I would navigate this maze, fight for my place, and prove that no one could ever take away what was mine again. As I stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind me, I realized that the journey I had started years ago in the wake of betrayal and heartbreak was far from over. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had fought to get here and I would fight to stay on top. Whatever it took.